Hello, welcome to the Halcyon podcast. It's been a while since I've done one of these, and I figured while I'm on a bit of a hiatus due to technical difficulties, Sky being about as much use as a chocolate teapot when it comes to providing internet service, I thought I'd record a couple of these podcasts to give myself an array of content, differing types of content, for people to sink their teeth into. And I think there's a couple of things that have happened very recently that have really shed a light on some of the things we're going to be talking about. The first thing I'm going to be talking about on this particular podcast, the subject, tagline if you will, is the repetitive nature of the media. What do I mean about this? Well, put simply, I feel that the media tend to run the same narratives over and over again, and this is reflected in the mainstream versions of media. So we're talking about the news and the stories that they project, sports stories, the same type of ebb and flows of stories tend to flow every single year, in movie trends, in music, and even fashion. I think, though, before you get into moaning about it, you have to ask, why do they do this? Why do they attempt to guide and assuage people to a train of thought that, let's say for the sake of argument, that they approve of? Let's say that this, the media or the governing bodies of the media or the people that are in charge, why do they continuously try to guide us in circles of a train of thought? And what's the point? Why do they get away with it? You know, if I can't be the only one that notices this sort of thing. It tends to be that a lot of these kinds of things get mirrored in social media, in interviews people do, in tweets and things of that nature. Despite what people think, though, I think the reason why they get away with it the most is because people, through lack of a better phrase, like familiarity. It's just something that people gravitate towards. It's something, maybe even on an unconscious level, people do it. They tend to gravitate towards the familiar because it makes it easier to deviate from that when they choose to do so. I mean, just in my world, for instance, the biggest thing I can, and as well, the media knows this, tries to gravitate towards it by keeping things familiar because they know that it's the thing that's going to sell, it's the thing that's going to be the easiest to pitch to a mainstream audience. If it's familiar, it's more easily picked up. The thing that kind of shines a light on this the most to me, in terms of just outright, it's very easy to put them side by side and compare, is Marvel's Cinematic Universe versus DC's Call It Universe. Very recently, you can see that DC have been trying to make strides in trying to catch up with the way that Marvel have executed their vision of a cinematic universe, making individual origin stories that enable them to make standalone films that are very profitable and enjoyable, but then culminate in ensemble films that enjoy the same level of success or exceed it dramatically. Now the problem is that DC have seen this formula and tried to copy it because they know that A, it's going to be familiar to the general public, and B, it's very easy to sell to backers, to stockholders. Now, the problem there is that with familiarity and repetitiveness, they forget the key essence of what media is, and that's originality and truth of the human experience, I guess, to a lesser extent. What I mean by this is, for instance, DC and Marvel have been competing in that sense for a while, and I think it's obvious by now that DC's attempt to copy the formula has failed pretty dramatically at this point. Evidenced by no stretch of the imagination when you compare, let's say, the first flagship ensemble film from Marvel, which is Avengers Assemble, compared to Batman vs Superman: The Dawn of Justice. Now, in essence, they're essentially the same kind of thing. Execution-wise, however, completely different, and with very different outcomes as a result, in terms of long-term success, and in terms of what is possible for the franchise to take it forward. And it annoys me because I'm an overthinker by nature. I'm the sort of person that notices these patterns. I'm the kind of person that wants to be challenged with something new. A preconception is something that I go into something with, and I always enjoy that preconception being proven wrong. A good example of this would be controversy within news stories in sport, for instance. If you watch sport, or if you watch celebrities on the red carpet or things of that nature, you'll often hear them uttering the same tired lines over and over and over again. To broadly speaking, the same kind of reception, which is always lukewarm, but for some reason we continue to pay attention to it. It just seems to be the norm. But then whenever we present something with someone with something genuinely controversial or different or atypical, any comment is one of two things. It's either controversial in its own right because there is no norm for what they're talking about, or they don't know what to say because they want to stick to the familiar and they want to stick to what they know is going to be the preconceived and accepted notion that the public is going to accept. Things like, for instance, in sport, gay players or abuse of partners by players in the NFL, for instance, or drug taking or gambling. These are very touchy subjects, controversial in their own right, and when people step out of their way to try and have an opinion that deviates even slightly from what is a preconceived norm, they're often butchered and hacked for it. But think about it for a second. How many people out there who are listening to this right now, all two of you, I kid, there's at least three. I'm one of them. How many of you have deviant opinions from even the people sitting next to you right now? People within your own household, people within... What is a social norm and opinion? Well, it's usually when a consensus is presented to an individual and they accept that consensus. But where does that consensus come from? Again, a preconceived notion that's put out by the media that everyone kind of eats up. Why do I emphasise this though? Why do I think that this is worth picking up? Because this is something that's been true for 50 years and it's going to be true for years to come. So why bother emphasising it? Why do I want to talk about it? Well, quite simply to emphasise it, to ask people to be more mindful of why and how they digest their media. And I'm talking in terms of the cinematic taste, the music taste, their fashion, where they get their news, how they get their news. And the reason for this is because I think that today we have an over-reliance on the norm, social expectation, and how the media perceives us as a culture being reflected back by us as a culture. I mean this by highlighting a recent event that everyone's going to be aware of and everyone has their own opinion of. The election of Donald Trump as President of the United States of America. There's been outrage, there's been controversy, there has been a tidal wave of people very quick to dismiss him as a candidate for the presidency, let alone the president-elect. But they're forgetting one thing. He won by popular vote. He won the race to become president, which means that at some stage or another, he was the choice of the people. Now, the consensus was not the case at all. Hence why it was a shock to a lot of people. And I think that's interesting because people forget the fact that they are on the losing side, even when the consensus has been put to them that they were on the winning side. It's very interesting to me that because their preconception has been challenged and it's been brought down by real world events, what actually happened. And this is something that's never really confronted in most mainstream media, and when it is, it's often very controversial. It's often talked about in its own right and dismissed as a fad or a phase. And what I wanted to ask people to do as a result of this podcast is very simple. I wanted to ask people to really think about what they choose to watch, what they choose to listen to, how they choose to watch it and listen to it, and think about how it affects your opinion on things. Because it just seems to me like these days our opinion is assuaged by things that we see rather than the things we think. And I mean that in the sense that the consensus is put to you and you accept the consensus for what is, but no one ever questions it. Donald Trump won by popular vote, and yet people are still outraged for whatever reason. But okay, lost though, it's the popular vote. People complain about the repetitive nature of, let's say, television, with the same shows airing every year with little to no development. I did a review on FIFA, which every single year is criticised for its lack of development. There's a simple answer for that. Familiarity does sell. Criticism will only ever level when it's met by the actions of the people that are criticising it. If you don't like it, you need to stop buying it. You can't buy it and then complain afterwards because you've already bought the damn product. If you don't like the outcome of an election, you need to campaign for change within the realms of which the democracy is set. That's the rule book you play by. I, for one, want to see change in a lot of things. I think the repetitive nature of something like fashion, for instance, is ridiculous. The fact that things are coming back into fashion that were in 20 years ago shows not only a lack of innovation, imagination, but also a success by the media to push on us what they think we should be doing. Why? Because they've run out of ideas. It's only when you discard the old that the new can be fully embraced. And I kind of wanted to say that because I think that it's in my own long and convoluted way. I'm basically saying I'm bored of seeing things coming. I want to be challenged. I want to see things change. I want to see things progress, because only through progression will things evolve and become better. No one ever got smarter by reading old books over and over again. Yes, you can interpret them in different ways. Yes, you can look back on trends and fashions and take from them, but not recycling them wholesale. Yes, you can look at other concepts and take from the concept. You can't just take the concept and copy it wholesale, because you're missing the point entirely if you do that. So, to summarise, I feel like the media is doing what it always has, borrowing from current and past concepts to satiate the masses' need for content, both in terms of guidance and in affirmation of what they're doing being cool and hip and what everyone else is doing. And I feel that what is lost is the desire to evolve into something new. And I'd ask those of you who listen to this to always pursue something that's completely different from the mainstream, even if it's a relatively minor thing. You like stamp collecting and no one does? For the love of God, keep doing it. You like writing, you like reading, you like recording music, you like whatever everyone else isn't doing, keep doing it. And better yet, show the world you do it, because only through individuals who show them different paths will people feel free and liberal enough to pursue their own light. And I believe it was a line in Coach Carter, which they might have even bothered or something. It's something along the lines of, only when we see someone else shine bright do we feel like we have the permission to do the same. And I feel like more people need to do that for others, because it's so easy to do that these days. I have the most utmost respect for people I see on Facebook and Twitter, for instance, who go out and do their own thing. But I have even more respect for the people I don't see who I know do things. Why? Because they do it for them. And that's the greatest thing I think is lost in these days. People's own personal pursuit for their own personal pursuits, not to show off in front of people, to show off how amazing a life they have or how much more affirmed they are in their lives than other people. Anyway, long, rambling, deep one, this one, I know. I thought I'd kick off with something rather convoluted just to test people's patience. Move on to something a little bit lighter in the next couple of podcasts, but once again, I want to say thanks to everyone that's listened. I just want to take a very quick moment to say thank you for anyone that's watched the last couple of shows. I hope they've gotten a little bit better. Even the presentation of this podcast hopefully should have improved somewhat. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for the next podcast and indeed the next show. Once I'm back online, they should be coming thick and fast. So thanks a lot again for staying tuned, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.